Let's talk about data entry forms in Access. There's nothing more frustrating than creating a form to enter new records of information into a multi-user Access database, only to find out days or even weeks after rolling it out to your users that the new form has caused a bunch of incomplete or junk records to show up in your tables that are now diluting the accuracy of the data. If you've taken any Access courses online or in person, or even watched any beginner Access tutorial videos, you've probably been taught how to add form field controls to a form and how to link those form fields to ones contained in your tables so the data entered in the form can be saved long-term and not just get lost when the form is closed. So let's say you go back and review the form you created, and all the form field control links appear to be intact and correctly mapped. The form doesn't seem to have anything wrong with it, and now you're left racking your brain trying to figure out why so many trash records are making their way into your tables. In this video, I'm going to show you first why this might be happening, as well as teach you some techniques for how to construct your forms in a way that eliminates this issue from occurring entirely, all without the use of any VBA code and only requiring a few simple macros. So let's get into it. As mentioned in my previous video, I have this calendar that I built to track events across various work streams, and I want to take a look at the Add New Event form that I've created, since, in its current form, it's allowing a lot of incomplete records to slip through and make their way into my events table. This form has two sections to it, but for what we're focusing on today, we only need to pay attention to the first section, which is what generates the new event. As you can see in this form, the data being captured for each event is the workstream the event applies to, the event title, start date, start time, end date, end time, and meeting agenda. Taking a look at the design view for the form, we can see that each one of those form fields are mapped directly to the corresponding fields in the events table. We can confirm this by clicking over to the Data tab on the form property sheet and verifying the record source. The record source is what dictates the data source that we want to have associated with this form, and as you can see here, the source currently selected is the events table, which is what we want. Now, taking a look at each of the form controls here on the form, we can confirm that each control is mapped to a field within the events table by either looking at the control on the form itself or by clicking each one and identifying the control source listed on the Data tab. The control source dictates what field or column within the events table we want linked with that specific control. I also had said you could determine this by looking at the control itself, and what I meant by that is that if no table field is linked to the form control, instead of showing a field header inside the text area, it would instead show the text unbound. You can see there are a number of unbound fields in section 2, but I'll also demonstrate this in section 1 by removing one of the control sources from one of the text fields on the form. And as you can see, in the detail area on the left, the text box now says that it is in fact unbound. I'm going to rebind it to the control source I had it as previously because I want to show you why this method of linking form controls directly to the table fields can result in a lot of data errors. In order to show you an example, let's open this form up in Form View and start inputting information for a new event. Let's also assume in this example that halfway through filling it out, I realized that I either didn't have all the details that I needed, or that I was informed halfway through building it that the event had already been created by someone else. As the designer of this form, I know that if I just click Cancel, it will undo the record that I'd partially started, and no unnecessary data would be created in my events table. But let's assume that I'm not the form creator, and as a general user, I see this Close button here at the top of my form. Since I don't know any better, I may instinctively decide to just close this form, thinking that doing so would cancel out of the event. However, if I open up the events table, taking a look at the data, my incomplete event still got created and is now cluttering my table. One approach that you might consider taking to combat this issue, if we open up the form design view on the Add New Event form again and look at the Event tab on the property sheet, is to simply add an undo record macro to the onClose event type. But this doesn't fully solve the problem either. See, if I'd partially filled out the form and decided instead to just close the Access database entirely, I would have effectively bypassed that event type, and the record would still be created regardless. Taking it even a step further, What if I'd partially filled this form out and then my computer needed to restart for a scheduled update while I'd stepped away from my screen? Any of these scenarios would have the same result of bad data being injected into my events table. So how can we guarantee that this doesn't continue to happen? Down here at the bottom of my form, I have my Create Event button, and I want this button to be the only way that any data entered into this form gets transferred into my events table. Rather than having any of these form controls be directly bound to the table fields, I'm going to unbind each of them and rename them to a similar name that I can easily reference later on when I'm writing my macros. Once I've renamed all my fields, I'm going to click over to the Form Design tab on the top ribbon of my Access program, and click the Add Existing Fields button located off to the right-hand side. In order to keep things tidy, I'm also going to extend down the form footer, and drag and drop all of the fields from the events table that I'm going to need to transfer data into when I create the event, down into the footer area. Now, if your forms don't have a footer, you can enable them by simply right-clicking anywhere within the form and selecting the Form Header/Footer option. With all of our form fields unbound and renamed, and our events table fields organized down here in the form footer, we are now ready to start writing our macros. Clicking over to the Create Event button and selecting the Macro Builder option for the on-click event type, I'm going to locate the Set Property macro listed in the Actions list of the macro design screen. In the Control Name section, I'm going to write the name of the first events table field that I want data to be transferred into. In this case, it was the Stream ID field that had been previously associated with the Workstream combo box on the form. For the property dropdown, I'm going to select Value because I want this field to receive the data that I'm about to send it. In the Value text field, I'm going to type an equals sign, which is going to convert the property value to a calculated field. And then I'm going to type an open bracket, forms, close bracket, which is saying that I want this calculated field to search in the forms object category. Then I'm going to add an exclamation point followed by another open bracket, and I'm going to enter the name of the Add New Event form followed by another closed bracket. So at this point in the equation, the calculation is going to first check in the Forms section, then it's going to look at the Add New Event form. And lastly, I'm going to add one more exclamation point and open bracket, and I'm going to enter the name of the retitled workstream form control that we had unbound previously, followed by a closed bracket. So looking at this complete equation, we are telling the system with this macro to search in the Forms section for the Add New Event form, and then extract the value from the Workstream combo box field on that form and insert it into the Events Table Stream ID field. I now need to repeat this process for each form field by copying and pasting the Set Property macro that I just wrote and changing the field names to match the other fields contained on the form and within the Events table. And then as the final macro, I'm going to add a Save Record macro. Once we're finished, we can save and close the macro design window and test out our solution on the form. I first want to test whether or not bad data can still make its way into the events table if the form is only partially filled out and then closed. So I'm going to type in some random text in some of these fields and then just close the form. Taking a look at the events table, as you can see, the junk record was not created, and the integrity of my events table data is still intact. Now we need to test whether the Create Event button is still going to generate the event when we actually do want to create it. Opening up the form again, I'm going to fill out each of the form fields, and then once I've done that, click the Create Event button. As you can see, all of the events table fields that we had put down in the footer area contain all the associated events details from the controls above. And if we open up the events table, you can also see that the record shown here at the bottom of the table matches the information on our form. But we don't want to leave that massive footer showing in our final product of our form either. So the last thing that we need to do is conceal these events table fields so that nobody knows they're there. If I highlight all of them and then click on the Format tab of the Properties sheet, you'll see that the first row on the list says visible yes. If we just change this value to no, those controls will no longer show up when the form is in form view. Now I also want to remove the footer entirely so there's not this giant white space here at the bottom. So I'm going to shrink down these controls and stack them on top of each other and just place them here at the bottom of the form so that I can easily get to them if I need to make any changes later on. Now I can just remove the footer by dragging it up until it is no longer visible. Save my form, and everything should be ready to go. One last form automation that I plan on covering in a future video that I would also want to have added to this form is adding additional logic to the Create Event button to first check whether or not all of the fields on the form contain the necessary information that I want them to prior to allowing the user to create the record. If that's something that you'd be interested in learning how to do, please let me know down in the comments. But ladies and gentlemen, this has been a tutorial of one of my preferred methods for mistake-proofing forms and preventing garbage data from finding its way into your tables. If you've made it to this point in the video and found the information to be helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up to let me know. If you're new to the channel and want to learn more about the Access program, I would love it if you subscribed, and if you had any specific tutorials that you'd like to see included as part of this series, please leave your suggestions in a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I wish you all the best with your own database projects. Have a good one, everyone.